We are currently up to page 183, continuing along, studying the 7 universal Noahide commandments, using the book, The Theory and Practice of Universal Ethics, the Noahide Laws, by Rabbi Dr. Shimon Dovid Cowen of Australia. And we are in part 2 of the book, chapter 7, Belief in God. And we're up to, as I said, page 183, partnership, otherwise known in the original, in the Hebrew language, in the rabbinic literature, as shituf, which literally means partnership. Now, thinking that perhaps today we should have devoted the class or part of the class to today being the 28th of the Hebrew month of Sivan, which is the day that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, together with his wife, arrived miraculously and safely to these shores of the United States in 1941. Or this upcoming Tuesday is the 3rd of the Hebrew month of Tammuz. And what does that mean and what does it not mean? But we're not going to do any of that, at least not at first. Maybe we'll discuss it in the latter part of the class. Otherwise, we had a, what do you call it? An executive decision to stick to our regular studies, and we're going to do at least a bit. Partnership, and then comes idolatry. So just to remind you, the way he presents it over here, Rabbi Cohen, is 3 stages, 3 parts. 1 is the ideal and the absolute truth. Doesn't matter who you are. The truth, the absolute truth, is not relative. Doesn't matter whether you're a Jew, a Gentile, a Noahide, or whether there are no human beings at all, that nobody was created. The truth is the truth is the truth, and that is it. That's the absolute truth. That's the first thing. And that is called the unity of God. Jews are obligated to believe in that exclusively. And that's a very, very deep level, and especially according to the teachings of Hasidus. Then, the next level down, which is a fallacy, it is not a truth. However, it's better than nothing. It's better than outright idolatry. And as we mentioned, but today we're going to get a little bit more into it, whether Noachides are permitted, it's definitely not advisable, and everybody agrees it's not ideal and it's not good. But the question is, technically, by the letter of the law, are they called transgressors, or are they permitted to relate to God with this mistaken approach called partnership, or is it forbidden for them as well? So that is a little bit controversial, whereas for the Jew, there's no question, the Jew is absolutely forbidden. So now let's see, what is this gray area, if you will, called partnership? Again, page 183. A second perspective on the relationship of God to creation is that God is seen as being in partnership with a created power or agency in creation. That is, although God is grasped as the ultimate power in creation, this other created power or agency is accorded a measure of significance as a conduit for God's influence. In other words, that partner, whatever that is, was created by God, but it was created, according to this philosophy, as a conduit to bring God into the picture. God's authority is not negated, inasmuch as he is seen as the major and ultimate authority over creation, including the lesser agency that people are dealing with, praying to, offering sacrifices, and what have you. At the same time, the concept of partnership does not have the degree of authenticity as does the above discussed concept of the unity of God. This is because a partner is one who has choice. And all the entities of creation, including the greatest and most powerful agencies, in reality have no choice. Only the human being, this is very, very special and unique, and it's a gift, and it's actually difficult to understand, initially at least. Only the human being, who, like the rest of creation, is in every moment recreated and sustained by God, and yet somehow has free choice. No one else has free choice. Angels do not have free choice. And anytime you will learn something, whether it's biblical or whether it's in the oral tradition, whatever, anytime you learn that something seemingly had a choice, whether it's an angel or whether it's some spiritual power or whether it's a constellation, whatever, it basically has to be understood allegorically. The only one that has free choice is the human being. But that does not empower him or her in any way to compel God to do anything, but rather only to merit to channel divinely granted powers. Okay, he just said that in one sentence, and there's actually volumes to be said about that. He made it sound very simple, and I could just let it go. Let's not get too much into that, especially before we finish the next paragraph. Let me just suffice by saying as follows. What he's touching upon over here is a very, very deep philosophical discussion. And that is, it's an ancient question, very age-old question. Free choice versus God's knowledge of everything, past, present, future, all the same. So how does it work? It's a contradiction. If God knows, but really knows, every single thing, including all the choices anyone's going to make, then they don't really have a choice. It's been predetermined. So it's not a real choice. And if you have a choice, then God, so to say, doesn't know. That can't be either. So there's, as I said, volumes to say about that. There's a simple answer, and then it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Be that as it may, though, free choice only a human being has. And even in that free choice, we cannot really, at the end of the day, really go against God's will. So then the free choice has to be explained. So what's our choice between what and what? And if sinning is against God's will, and we can sin, and the proof is that, unfortunately, some do, all present company excluded, of course. So since one actually does sin, and if sin is against God's will, so how does that work? And if you're going to say that sin is not against God's will, so then why is it a sin? And can't be a game. So again, that's a whole discussion. But let's back up and get back to the point for a moment. The partnership aspect. If you have two partners in any endeavor, in a business or anything, and one partner cannot make any decisions, he's not in on the decision making at all, that's not really a partner. I mean, maybe technically in legal terms it is, because he's getting 50% of the profits. I don't know. So a silent partner is such a concept where he may have zero input in the decision making. Just the way it's worked out somehow, for whatever reason, he gets 50% of the profits, or he has to put in 50% of the input, and then he makes the money, whatever. But in a regular situation of partnership, a partner has to have an equal opinion in the decision making. So there is no such thing when it comes to anything other than God. So there's no such thing as having a partner, because by definition, a partner means one who has choice. And as we said, the only ones who have any type of free choice are human beings. Okay, so let's just leave that for now, and we'll continue. The view of the partnership with God of major agencies and powers at least acknowledges God as the ultimate power in creation, or as the Talmud puts it, Elokad Elokaya, the God of gods. And you'll notice, first one is capital G-D. The second one is lowercase G-O-D. Big difference. First one is a mistaken non-entity. It's not a deity. It's not a god. It's called a god. These are foreign gods. So they refer to God as the God of gods, meaning he's the ultimate truth. He's the CEO. He is the one who put everything into being, including the little gods. But now he has these partners or this partner or whatever. So they're not denying God. Moreover, the ultimate reality that everything is totally nullified to God is a perception which is not readily manifest to all humanity. So we're saying that not necessarily can everybody be on that level to philosophically accept such a high level of what we call in Hasidus bittul, nullification, total self-negate. So not everyone can be on that level. For these reasons, partnership is permissible according to the principal view in Noahide law. Okay, we're not getting into the technicalities that in one place it says that it's not allowed. It's fair to say that bottom line, according to Jewish law, it is permissible for a non-Jew to subscribe to the philosophy of partnership, even though it's not true, even though that is a false philosophy. Traditionally, it is called partnering of the name of heaven with something else. That's a direct translation of the way it's called in the Talmudic literature, Shituf Shem Shamayim, to partner the name of heaven, which means God himself, the true one and only God, with something else. Doesn't matter what, anything else, that is what we're talking about. Whilst it is not permitted to worship that power in conjunction with God, for that would in fact be treating it as an independent power. In Noahide law, one may associate it with the transcendent God. It's a little bit of a subtle difference here. You cannot worship that partner of God, but the Noahide is permitted, not ideal, but is permitted to associate it with the transcendent God, meaning realizing all the time that ultimately there is God and he is in full control, and whatever he wants, that's all that counts. However, and then whatever conduits or channels the person chooses to go through. This permission or forbearance of partnering God with something else in thought and speech is the baseline position of Noahide law. Pretty strong statement, but he's quoting footnote 17, the source for this. This is the Ramah's commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, the Jewish Code of Law, tells exactly which section and exactly where it is found over there. So all of the Noahide law is based on this. It includes taking an oath, which mentions both God and this other power or agency, which they're allowed to do, and a Jew can't. This permission does not extend, however, to serving it in partnership with God in an act of worship. Now, of course, this would need to be explained, and we'd have to devote a tremendous amount, as he references where to look it up in footnote 18, because what exactly, practically speaking, is the difference? It's even a partnership. One would only be able to worship God, which means when bringing a sacrifice, you wouldn't be allowed to bring it to any mountain or planet or the god of this mountain or the god of this sea or the god of this or the god of that. And even in praying, you really wouldn't be allowed to, well, see, we'd have to define worship, we'd have to define prayer. But in prayer, you also wouldn't be allowed to really pray to anything other than God. So then the question is, so what are they doing with this partnership? What are they doing that's wrong but permissible? It's basically ascribing, or the way that they view God is not in the absolute unified way of Hashem Echad, that there's one God and only one God, and Yahid, the one and only. That's pretty much the partnership thing. So, for example, like we gave the example of the other class, there's a big company, and the person who has any type, there's a hierarchy, and you need to go to your manager, etc. Who can hire and fire? Well, depending on the example we want to use, it doesn't necessarily ever get to the CEO if it's a real big company. Now, does he have the veto power? Can he at any given point step in and just make decisions? Absolutely. In the example we're giving, I mean, obviously there's cases where there is a board and then he can't, but let's say that the CEO can override any decision of the board. It's his company. It's a privately owned company. Okay? So that would be the way they view God. Now, all the rest, as they're asking them for a raise, or for days of vacation, or for more pencil sharpeners, whatever they're asking for, they realize that those people are basically puppets. They're the same as I am, just they're on a higher level. They can make decisions that affect me. And then they too have their superiors who they have to answer to. And there's this hierarchy until you get to the ultimate one, who at any given time can mix in. Now, that's just the parable. Now let's bring it back to the reality with God. The difference is, this great CEO does not even need to know all the petty details of the payroll and who's being hired and fired and how many days this guy got, all those things. Whereas God knows everything, but chooses not to mix in actively. So that's a major difference. But still, that would be the idea of partnership, that people thinking that basically, the way we explained it, I think it was last time or previous class, the difference between the following two parables. On the one hand, the waiter, the butler, serving me at the feast, at the restaurant, what have you. Or the axe in the hands of the woodchopper. The reality is, everything is an axe in the hands of the woodchopper. Woodchopper being God, and everything else that they mistakenly call gods are merely axes in the hands of the woodchopper. And what's the mistake that they make? That would be viewing them as a waiter who has choices and therefore deserves praise. And if you give him a nice tip, you can actually get more, etc., etc. That's the mistaken approach as versus the correct approach. And now we move on to the third one, which is the absolutely forbidden approach for anybody, and it's unexcusable. And this is the main one of the 7 Noahide commandments, and this is forbidden for all of mankind. And that is idolatry. In terms of the relationship of God and creation, Idolatry is a further step from the unity of God, which takes a created entity and forgetting or denying God, makes this entity its sole object of worship. Idolatry is, in this regard, consists in worshiping as absolute, as God, something created by God. That's the mistake. So in his terms, the key word here would be worship. If you worship God and you don't worship the other deities or the other things that you ascribe powers to, that's partnership. As soon as an individual worships anything other than God, that is idolatry. Whether this is a physical, spiritual, or other non-physical entity. Thus, one regards the sun or the moon as the first principle of creation is an idolater. Somebody believes that the sun was the first one here, and the sun brought everything else into creation, and then there's this evolution and whatever it is, but it all starts with the sun. That is outright denial, and that is not partnership, that is idolatry. So also one who takes a concept such as human autonomy and makes it the ultimate principle of creation. The materialism of communism, which states that the material matter with its presumed laws is the ultimate principle of reality, is also idolatry. It has taken a created entity, matter, and made the absolute. So too, in pantheism, it's also idolatrous, for it makes the creation itself into an absolute or first principle. In other words, the only absolute is God and God alone. Everything else is a creation of his, so he chooses, so to say, easy come, easy go. The only thing which is not come and go, and always was and transcends times and space, and always will be, is God and God alone. He's the only absolute truth. Everything else is relative. So by taking any created entity and giving it this absolute quality, that is idolatrous. To the extent that atheism is rooted in a materialistic doctrine, which regards matter or the physical creation as all there is. It is itself idolatrous. So one might say, atheism, that's not worshiping anyone or anything else. That simply means the denial of God. Why is that idolatrous? Because what do you mean? They are substituting something for God. They're just not calling it a God or a deity. So instead, what are they saying? The theory of evolution or anything like that. In other words, materialism or nature, whatever you want to call it scientifically. The fact that philosophically they are substituting something for the creator, that is idolatrous. Top of 185. Another form of idolatry, more rooted in error than willful idolatry fixated on a created object, could even acknowledge the existence of God. So how can you have idolatry if it acknowledges God? At worst, that would be partnership. So it says, but take the view that the creator has withdrawn from involvement with creation. In the beginning, yes, he created all, but then he chose to get out of the picture completely and to allow whatever he created run itself, or the deities that he made, that they should run it. This is expressed in the mistaken belief which states that God has abandoned the earth. Okay? Quoting a verse in Ezekiel. Ozav Hashem es haaretz. God has abandoned the earth. Or that God is too lofty to be interested in the happenings of the creation and has therefore left their supervision in the hands of powers within the creation. So again, using the parables, it's almost like the difference of what type of a CEO is it, or what's the structure of this business. Is he kind of involved, just not in the petty details, but he's still takes an interest, or he still can at any given moment step into the picture? Or did he just move on and move away and is totally disinterested, even though it's still his company and he still, makes the money, but he could care less? This view is mistakenly extrapolated from the verse which states that he is exalted above the nations, his glory is upon the heavens. So it's a real verse in the book of Psalms. It says, Ram al kol goyim Hashem, that he is exalted above all nations. So they misunderstood that verse to say that it's beneath God's dignity. It's beneath his honor. Why are you reducing him to caring about all these petty little things? And everything compared to him is so insignificant and petty. So that's their mistake. In other words, they're making him too great, so to say. Since this view imputes an independence of powers within creation and claims that God exercises no dominion over the creation, from whichever angle they're coming, but that's what they're really saying. It is also idolatrous in that it separates God from the creation and gives absolute power to other agencies supposedly entrusted with conduct of the creation. Okay, now the source for this last piece, that he could say that that's called idolatrous and not partnership, so he brings it from a Hasidic discourse, which begins with the opening words, Mein Rabbi, which there states that this approach is idolatrous as opposed to partnership. Therefore, Noachites cannot believe in this. Although they're allowed to believe in shituf and partnership, this is not in that category. As if they believe that God left creation and he really gave full power and choice to anything else, that is not called partnership. That is out of bounds. That is idolatrous for everybody. Okay, let's move on. The service and appurtenances of idolatry. There are many laws concerning what constitutes the service of idolatry and how one must treat idolatry and its appurtenances. These include discussion of whether it is permitted to have any benefit from idolatry and measures to be taken to distance oneself from it. These may be found in the standard works on the Noachide laws. As references, the book Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem, which is the real text for the Divine Code book, the Hebrew one with all of the many footnotes, references, etc. We have limited our concern to what belief in the unity of God, partnership, and idolatry mean. The younger generations of our society have grown up in much ignorance of the belief in God. There is similarly little knowledge of the categories of theology. Creation, that God is creator. Revelation, that God has revealed fundamental moral and other truths. And redemption, that God providentially guides the creation towards and will affect redemption in tandem or interaction with an ethical human service based on the existence of free will. The following offers a basic outline of these basic topics of faith, again, because so much has been, not given to today's generation. So the next piece now is he's going to speak about that. And as he brings down the footnote, this is based on the 13 principles of faith, which the Rambam of Maimonides spells out in his commentary to the Mishnah. And from there, it became very popular, the 13 cardinal principles of Jewish faith. And many people recite them daily. And they're known as Anima Amin. Each one starts with the Hebrew words, I believe with perfect faith that. And there's 13 of those. And based on that is where he's going to explain out these points of creation, revelation, and redemption. I think, though, that we're going to stop at this point. We'll open up for, as usual, questions, answers, discussion. And depending on what people want and the time that we have, we then can discuss today, 28th of Sivan, and this upcoming Tuesday, the 3rd of Tammuz. So firstly, anybody have anything they want to clarify or give clarification or ask with regards to what we just covered today? Any comments? No?
I did have a question.
Good.
When we speak of worship, what is it we're actually referring to?
Is another form in the Hebrew of saying worship service.
What does that mean? All those words. What does that mean? So, in other words, let's get back to the examples that we're using. The case of the butler, the waiter, is that partnership, shituf, or is that avodah zarah, idolatry? So, if you were to say that that is forbidden and that is idolatry, that means that instead of making the mistake that you think that your relationship with God is that he gave you this butler to serve you, but you're not making a mistake thinking that the butler is the owner of the estate and that this is his party. You don't think that for a moment. Do you acknowledge the butler by saying thank you? Okay, you give him a tip. But for not for a minute do you think that this is really his wine and that it's really ultimately his decision making. However, if you forget and you actually think that this butler is the one who gave it to you, and your thank you to him is not merely because you view him, instead of viewing the act it as an axe in the hands of the woodchopper, you're viewing it as a butler, and therefore you're thanking him and thinking that it's really him, then that would be idolatry. So that's what worship would be. So maybe the same expression, but it depends on your intention. When you say thank you, or when you're asking, or in your prayers. So you're talking to Hashem. Here, I'll give you an example. There are many things, if you would only know so many of these Jewish customs, like especially like some really detailed ones, or ones that are not very well known. One, superficially, might wonder, what is the difference between that and a superstition or an idolatrous thing? There's so many things that many observant Jews do or are careful not to do or do or whatever, and it looks on the surface so similar to stuff that we're not allowed to do. And it's a very, seemingly sometimes a very subtle difference, but it's a world of a difference. Let me just take one that's not so unusual, or I should say, not one that's so not well known. Once a month, the Jewish men, generally on a Saturday night, right after Shabbos, step outside into the public, not to be under any, but to be directly under the sky, and at a certain point in the month, say a special blessing on the new moon. Okay? We make a bracha, a blessing, thanking God for the moon. and for the cycle that the moon does. And Jewish people, our calendar is a lunar calendar. We're compared to the moon that waxes and wanes. So we thank God for the moon. That's once a month. Same idea. This one's not as well known because it's only once in 28 years. Every 28 years, we do a very similar thing with the sun. Not at night, but in the morning. In the morning, on a particular day, once in 28 years, we step outside and we look at the sun and we say a blessing and we thank God for the sun and for the whole solar system, basically. Now, that could look like to an unlearned, illiterate onlooker, it could look, God forbid, like worshiping the sun and the moon. Well, then, what really is going on? What is the Jewish thing here? First of all, you open up the prayer book, the Siddur, and you look at what we say. We are saying the exact same opening line as we do every time we bless God. A Jew blesses God at least 100 times a day in a formal sense. And the opening words are Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, translated as blessed are you, God, our God, King of the entire world, the whole universe. And then we fill in the blank. That's the generic opening statement of every blessing, basically. So when we're thanking of the moon, we say the same thing. We are not praying in any way, shape, or form to the moon. We are saying, blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe, that has created the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever, and go on. And then we thank him. Blessed are you, God, for renewing the cycle of the moon, thus known as a month. But we're going outside, and before we say the blessing, we look at the moon, and then we say the blessing. Same thing with the sun. It's the same blessing we do when we hear thunder, or see lightning, or witness a tornado, or a hurricane, or any super unusual type of natural phenomenon. There's a blessing that we say. Thanking God, though, we're not talking to, God forbid, the God of the lightning or the God of the thunder. No, none of that nonsense. There's no God of thunder, God of lightning. In a humorous way, I'll tell you a true story that happened with a certain rabbi. He was actually a great teacher. Unfortunately, passed away at a young age. And when he was a very young child, so at one point, it began thundering very, very heavily. He got really scared. And he kept running into his parents' bedroom, really scared. Very scared, a little child, of thunder. So at one point, finally, his father tells him, you need not be afraid, because it is God who is doing that. God is running everything. He's making the thunder and lightning, etc. Don't be afraid. Okay? And then again, this tremendous boom of thunder, and the child comes running back to his parents, and the father asks him, what happened? He says, I'm afraid of God. So that has depth to it. And we thank God for so many things. Just open up the Siddur and look at all the morning prayers, etc., etc., etc. So the truth is, in the sanctification of the new moon, there is a point where it looks like we're talking to the moon. But again, that's not in any way, shape, or form worship. And it's just metaphorically. What we're saying is just like I can't touch you and I can't reach you, so too none of my enemies should be able to reach me. But it's metaphorically speaking. As a matter of fact, when the first man landed on the moon back then, so there was a certain great rabbi in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, who suggested that we now need to modify the prayer book and take out that line that says that just as I can't reach you or touch you, so to my enemies shouldn't be able to reach or touch me. And the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach responded to that and said, basically, paraphrasing, that's ridiculous to be concerned with that, because we don't mean in our prayers that it is impossible for any human being to ever in any way be able to reach the moon and touch it. We mean to say, and then he describes it, and you have an old man, an old Jew with a white beard standing down here, and he's doing this, the prayer, the blessing, the ritual of sanctifying the new moon and blessing God for it. He can't reach and touch the moon, and that's all we mean. You don't have to be so similarly. The whole idea is it's to be understood metaphorically. So when you're worshiping, you're only worshiping God. James.
Hi, Rabbi Turin. Thank you. I'm wondering about the permissibility for Bnei Noach and Shituf, and my theory is that it's because of it's an intellectual issue which can be rectified. It's an ignorance issue, in other words. Maybe that's why Yisrael needs to lachov non-Jews, but it's like they're trying.
Well, he alluded to it over here, and he's right. The only argument one could make is that now, historically speaking, that we have entered Yemei HaMashiach, the Messianic era, so things have changed. But let's back up, and let's say the way it was up until recent times. So the way that it's explained in Chassidus, in the Maim Rabbi that he refers to, is that it's not possible. There are those people that, not because of a lack of information or intelligence, but simply because of who they are spiritually speaking, they cannot relate on the level of Achdus Hashem, of the unity of God, and they need to. The only way they can is to resort to Shituf, even though that's not 100% correct. Shituf is not the absolute truth, and that's why the Jews would have to compel them to keep the laws, and that's the basis of the laws. So that actually is, or at least arguably, was true until now. So it's not just that, if only we give them all that information and teach it to them. Now again, it could be that changed. And that's why it's important to learn, for example, Shar HaYichud V'Hamuna from the Tanya. And that's why it's available for everybody. But it's possible, I'm not saying this with certainty, it's possible that now we're at a point where everybody can have a relationship with God, not in the form of partnership. But if that is so, that's something new. That's a chidush, that's a novelty, which has begun just now in very recent years.
What about the Chida in Magal Tov? It seems to contradict with this Rabbi I don't know his full name, Rabbi Y. Harlop, page 183.
No, because if you look at the wording of there in the Chida, it says that I interrogated, I investigated, I questioned, whatever the language there is. In other words, he saw that this individual was on the level that he was able to relate to Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the unity of God. And
Right.
That's why I did him. So, on the contrary, you could actually one can bring a proof from the Chida that it's not necessarily for everybody. Because he makes a big deal that how he found this person.
Oh, I got you. Okay, yeah, you're saying on a general, all-encompassing level, everyone. Oh, yes, yeah, okay, I agree. I thought you meant like it wasn't possible, or maybe the author was saying it wasn't possible for.
No. But
Okay.
as a general rule, it's almost like the assumption would be that it's not possible, and there could be many exceptions. And perhaps we could say that shifted.
Yeah.
But old school, for sure, would be that a non-Jew, as a generalization, can't relate on the higher level.
Right. For my personal experience, from coming from that side, I run into a lot of what I would describe as just exhaustion. There's so many non-Jews that are like, well, that's the way I was raised, and I don't want to deal with it. Type, they're exhausted. They're exhausted of it almost. They don't want to talk about a new concept or idea.
Right. So it's not just that they're intellectually lazy. It could be that this exhaustion, as you call it, is because of their spiritual state, that they can't really connect all those dots. It's like, don't confuse me with the facts.
Right. They're exhausted. It's like they're under duress or whatever. It's like they're past that time in their life where they can do that now or something. I don't know else how to describe it. But I think about that, and then like Olam Haba, the concept of Hasidei Moto Olam, they are still in that concealment, but they receive a portion in the world to come. In the world to come, can you still study Torah? Can you still study Torah and take, I don't want to say take on mitzvahs, but like in this case, there's a world to come. A non-Jew enters the world to come. They were not previously Akdus Hashem, but now they are starting to, in the world to come, they're now studying Tanya, things like that. What do you think about that?
So that's what I'm saying. There could be that now there's this major shift happening. And therefore, any individual who wants to tap into it, it's available. It's almost like saying that anyone or almost anyone can become the exception to the rule. And then you say, well, then that's not the rule anymore. Well, no, it still is officially the rule. It just used to be that it was not possible for the majority to be exceptions. And now everybody can be an exception, but it's still the rule, so to say.
And in Olam Haba, there's this concept of a composite soul, like people's souls are creating a composite in the next world or some such. Is there this concept of like a Gilgul of creating a composite, like something greater?
It depends on, you see, the term Olam Haba, the world to come, has a few definitions depending on the context. So it depends on which aspect we're talking about, but basically, yes.
All right, it's probably as deep as we can go in the scope of this conversation, so I do appreciate it. And thank you for the class tonight.
Sure. Okay, so I think for the remaining time, we're going to touch upon today being the 28th of Sivan, and mainly this coming Tuesday, which is the 3rd of Tammuz. In 1941, right in the middle of the war, great efforts were made after the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe at the time, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, 6th in a direct line of Rebbes, starting with the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, Rabbi Shneer Zalman. That was his great-great-great-grandfather. So he miraculously came to America in 1940 with his family. Family meaning 1 out of 3 daughters, one out of three sons-in-law. The youngest daughter and her husband, that they were pretty much newlyweds, were killed in Treblinka, the concentration camp. The middle daughter and her husband were fleeing, and they were in Germany, they were in France, and then they ran away to Italy, and ultimately they miraculously made it to the United States in 1941. And that is the current Rabbi, Melech HaMashiach. He's the middle son-in-law. His wife, what we call the Rebbitzin, that's female Rebbe, Rebbitzin Chayamushka. They came in the 28th of Sivan, which was in June of 1941. Came here, and as soon as he arrived, his father-in-law, who was the Rebbe then, and going to be the Rebbe for the next 9 years, appointed him in charge of the outreach and educational arms of the movement, Lubavitch Chabad. And the sixth Rebbe started one institution called Machane Israel, another one called Merkaz Linyani Chinuch, and a third one called the Kichas Publication Society. And the purpose of all these basically is to strengthen and bolster Judaism, especially Hasidus, to everybody. He put in charge his newly arrived son-in-law. Now, at the time, his son-in-law, later to become his successor, was very reserved and apparently tried very hard to conceal his greatness and everything about him, his scholarliness, his saintly holiness, everything. But people knew, and people with a keen eye thought on him. Actually, he worked for a number of years in downtown Brooklyn in the for the Navy, the U.S. Navy, doing war efforts there. And he would go to work, and even came in on Sundays instead of Saturday, and he would work there. Anyhow, be that as it may, there's a concept in Hasidus that explains the globe, this round world, as spiritually having a top half and a bottom half. Now, really, there's no top and bottom because it's a round ball and the whole solar system. So we may be accustomed in our head to, put it in a certain way, with the North Pole being up, South Pole being down. But as we know, there's no up and down in reality. You go, for all you can turn it the other way around, and just because all the words on the maps and on the globes are going to be upside down, so just rewrite it. You can make the South Pole what we call up. There's no, up means out of the globe towards the sky, towards the heavens. That's up, and down means towards Earth. Anyway, spiritually speaking, the top of the world is the land of Israel and the entire Middle East and that part of Asia, all that. If you were to, so to say, take Mount Sinai or Israel as the North Pole, hold it your globe like that, and then make this new equator, and anything on the top half is the spiritual top half of the world, and anything on the bottom half is the spiritual bottom half of the world, which means that America is in the bottom half of the world. Not the way it is now. Now it's just the Western Hemisphere. But if you hold it the other way, it's the bottom half. The giving of the Torah, the revelation at Sinai, affected in a real way only the top half. The way that I explain it to children, because this is a very deep concept and it's hard to really grasp it, the way I explain it to children is I make it kind of graphic. And I say, take a globe and hold Israel on top, and then pour something like maybe honey or caramel, liquid ice, something which is in between a thick liquid, and pour it. Now, what's going to happen, if it's not too sticky, is it's going to more or less go down to about halfway, and it may drip a little bit, but then it drips down. It's not going to continue, unless it's very sticky, to really envelop the bottom. So the top will have this coating, this cover, and then it'll, roughly at the equator area, it'll just go straight down. Spiritually speaking, that's what happened. Godliness penetrated, permeated this physical world only in the top half. The bottom half, this is what the Alter Rabbi explains, the author of the Tanya. The bottom half never really got truly saturated with the holiness of the revelation at Sinai. Okay? So that's kind of unholy or sad. When did that change? That changed when the sixth Rebbe came to the United States permanently. He came around 1930 for a visit. He spent about a year here, but that was just the intention of a visit. He went back to Europe then. When he came in 1940 to establish his permanent residence here, and likewise a year later, 1941, when his son-in-law came, that is when they brought the sanctity of the revelation at Sinai to this bottom half of the world. And what's so significant about that? So when you want to pick up something very heavy, like a round bowling ball, let's say, but a really heavy one, or take a metal round ball, if you want to raise it, you have a chance of picking it up. How would you do it? Forget about the bowling ball having the holes where you put your fingers in. It's too heavy. No holes in it. How would you raise it? You'd take your hands, and you wouldn't do like the great basketball players can do, because that's the whole idea, that it looks so cool when they do it, because it goes against our intuitive expectation. When they palm the ball like this from the top, and they go like that, so and make it look so easy, that's unusual. What you do is you take your hand or hands, and kind of from the bottom you pick it up. That's a simple law. In science, that's how it would work. That's your chance to pick it up, is go beneath it. Similarly, spiritually speaking, in order for us to elevate the world, i.e., to bring Mashiach and get us to that messianic era and the time of the ultimate redemption, the world needs to be elevated from the bottom. Bottom meaning spiritually, and that's the United States. So that's the real significance of the arrival of the tzaddik, the righteous person of the generation, to the bottom half of the United States. So although the 28th of Sivan is very important, and even if it was just the day of the salvation of the Rabbi Melech HaMashiach and his wife, that itself would be enough and a reason for celebration, but it's much deeper than that. It's this idea of the elevation of the bottom half of the world, which means the ultimate entering into the times of Mashiach. That is, and why I'm really excited this year is because it coincides, sounds silly, but I think it really isn't. It coincides with the 4th of July, Independence Day. Now, the whole thing is about not just that, they were saved from occupied Nazi Europe or from the war. Where were they saved to? Where did they come to? According to the explanation I just gave, it's a really important part of it. It's that it's the bottom half of the world. It's that it's the United States. And over the years, the Rabbi Mashiach made a big deal about the United States in a very positive way. So the fact that he came to the United States, and this year it coincides, the Hebrew date of the 28th of Sivan. In 1948, it wasn't the 4th of July. It was sometime in June. But the fact that it coincides with the 4th of July, that's really exciting. Now, I was curious, so I looked up. How often does it happen that the 28th of Sivan is on the 4th of July? At least since 1941. this is the third time it's ever happened. Since 1941, this is the third time. It happened once in, let me translate the year, I looked up the Hebrew years, in 1959. It happened in 2017, and this year. It's not a common thing. And I think it's very exciting because it really is sort of shows, it's like a sign, so to say, of the imminence of Mashiach and of the complete redemption. Okay, be that as it may. We're running out of time. Let me just, yes.
Aaron.
Go ahead. Aaron?
I'm here. Okay, sorry about that. Couldn't unmute. All right, so that brings me to a question. I was sitting one day and I was looking at the rainbow, and I started thinking about 770. And then I started thinking about why 770 is so important. Well, the center in New York is 770. All the Jewish people I know everywhere, their phone numbers are 770, or everything they try to link with that 770. But it seemed to me, isn't that significant for 7 laws for 70 nations?
Well, you're not the first one to come up with that. And as a matter of fact, one of the websites for the 7 Noahide commandments is called 7, the number, and then FOR, and then 70, the number. 7 for 70. And that's exactly what it is, a take of 770. Nothing is a coincidence. And the fact that there are 7 laws for the 70 nations, which is 770, is pretty cool. But it's, that's
Is that the reason for the creation of the place?
No, it's really divine providence. No one had any intentions when they bought that building back in 1940 because of the address. They had to find a place, and this was the suitable place, and that was the address of the house. On one side of it is 768, and okay, whatever. And the one to the other side is 772. So not really, but you know what I mean. Sometimes they skip numbers, whatever. But it's just in order of sequence. And then after the fact, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach revealed to us, as a matter of fact, it was on the 28th of Sivan, 1991, that he spoke all about the significance and importance of the number, of the address, and what it signifies, and the 7 attributes that God created and uses to create the world, chesed, gevura, etc. And he spoke a lot about the number 770, and that the numerical value of the word paratsta, which is the theme of Lubavitch, based on the verse that God blessed the forefathers with spreading and breaking through all barriers. So he uses the word paratsta, Pei Reish Tzadik Tes, and that equals 770. And, ready for this one? The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach writes that the word Beis Mashiach, which means the house of the Messiah, Beis Mashiach, Beis Yud Saf, Mem Shin Yud Ches, equals 770. So there's no coincidences.
Amazing.
All right. Enjoy your fireworks. And it's all, I hear the fireworks and I'm so excited that everybody's celebrating, the fact that Melech HaMashiach arrived at the United States in 1941, and more so that Mashiach is coming right now. That's how I hear all these fireworks.
Oh, man.
It's all in the eyes of the beholder. It's all, up to your perception creates reality. And a lot of times people do things or we do things and not even knowing, not having the conscious intention for something, but really that's what we're doing. So that's how I view all these celebrations. And that's why it's a legal holiday today. Should be every year. The 28th of Sivan should be a legal holiday. All right. Everyone be well. We are scheduled for next week. Mirz Hashem, b'li neder.
Thank you, Rabbi Turin. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Turin.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. A good evening.